it to lava!
Welcome to General Quarters, the Lepanto Institute. We have with us a very special guest today, Stephen Brady, founder of the Roman Catholic Faithful. But before we get started, please don't forget to hit the subscribe button and like button if you like the content today. And, we cannot do this without your help. So if you wish to support the Lepanto Institute, we would ask that you please go to lepantoin.org and make a donation right there as you see it on the screen. And secondly, if you have a second, you look for some Catholic gifts. Another thing that keeps us in business is the LepantoCatholicGifts.com. And we have a beautiful Sacred Heart cross, and we're recommending you get it blessed. And actually, this one was sculpted by Michael Hitchborn, the president of Lepanto. It's a beautiful piece, and he's got his signature on the back, and it's solid sterling silver. It's absolutely, I think it's magnificent. And we're recommending you get that blessed because we're viewing it as a sacramental. That being said, Mr. Stephen Brady, please join us.
Thank you very much. Real good. Thank you very much.
Stephen, it's great to have you here. I've seen you speak several times, and as we were talking before the show started, I think you have a lot of impact on people. And I just want to start out by saying, fair to say, your organization goes after and attempts to root out and prosecute the plague of evil that's in the church hierarchy right now by, any objective measure. The evil's pretty systemic. Do me a favor, first, give me some of your background and how you came to do this type of work.
Well, I started out. I attended Purdue and Indiana University for a short time. I was drafted into the military. I dropped out of both universities to serve. I had a low lottery number. I was placed in the military police, then had a chance and got a special assignment, got a secret security clearance from the FBI, and did that for a few years. I was looking after nuclear weapons, basically. It was glorified guard duty, but I had more power than you don't realize the power and authority you have until later in life. I was a 21-year-old kid with a gun that nobody could touch, basically. Right. And when I got out of the service, that's right after that I met my wife, but a priest got a hold of me, Father Switek, may he rest in peace. And basically, I wanted to start a family, and I wanted to get right with God and right with the church. And I had not been a very good, faithful Catholic, and I wanted to get things in line. This was in the 70s. Father even pulled me aside, straightened me out, and he would, when I'd meet a girl, he always taught that dating was a preparation for marriage. He would let me know because he knew the town. I was in Petersburg. I moved here and out of the service. I didn't want to go back to where I came from, the harbor up near Hammond, Indiana.
Sure. And still no town, right? Still no country?
Right. I worked at a couple factories up there before being drafted. And he would let me know if the young lady I met was a keeper or not. He knew most of the people in town.
Sure.
And he wouldn't tell me anything about them. But when I met my wife, Joanne, he said she's a keeper. And she was actually Methodist. And he started giving us both instructions individually. And she loved the Catholic faith. She says, I've been missing this my whole life. She was a few years younger than I was at the time. I was 26. She was 21. And we eventually got married. She became a much better devoted Catholic than I am. And seven children later. It was about the 1990s. They were in public school. My oldest child was 14. And what was going on in the public schools was a horrific pornographic sex education program. And I had opted my children out, which the state allows, but still they found a way to indoctrinate my oldest, especially with some of this nonsense. And the problem was the teacher, my son's teacher, one of the teachers, homeroom teacher that brought in some of this stuff, was also his religion teacher at the local parish. And then several of the school board members were Catholics who served as extraordinary ministers. And when I went to these folks, all Catholics, I said, you got to stop these programs. I won't go into any detail here with the programs because it is rather, even using correct biological terms, it's not fit for consumption of some children. And none of these Catholics would do anything, would stop it. They even brought Planned Parenthood in to teach the classes. I sat in on the first Planned Parenthood class.
Wow.
Parenthood was brought in by a Catholic, by the way. I sat in on the class, and one of the first things Planned Parenthood told the folks, the kids there, was they had somebody standing on each side of me while I sat in the classroom. I guess they thought I was going to be disruptive or something. But in the classroom, the first thing Planned Parenthood told our children was, your parents don't need to, you come see us. They don't have to be told. You can get help. The first thing they did was undermine parental authority.
Yes.
So that's when I put up a billboard in town protesting Planned Parenthood. I bought a lot across from the courthouse, and the sign said, Planned Parenthood, the largest abortion provider, had been allowed to teach in our high school. If they cannot abort our children, the least we can do is let them educate the ones they missed. And well, it was a subtle message, but it made the point. And a city alderman was caught cutting it down one night. He was arrested by a police officer that was on probation under his authority. And it became a big news item. And I got on Focus on the Focus on the Press. I got a lot of news coverage. And at this point, I went to the hierarchy and the priest, and I asked him, why is this going on? Why isn't something being done? And I got no answers. So I finally started sending out a letter to all the clergy within the diocese, asking them, fathers, explain to me, what am I doing wrong? Where's my thinking wrong? And then I got a few priests with hateful letters, but a couple that said, Mr. Brady, don't you know? And I said, Father, what are you talking about? And they started to tell me about Bishop Daniel Ryan's predatory homosexual nature with young boys, with priests. And then it just started from there. As I started investigating, I started to find out more and more about what he was doing. I started interviewing people, and I held a few press conferences. The newspapers would say I was lying, quoting the bishop. And one of those times, a young lady called me. Her name was Sandra, and she had had a rough life herself, been abused as a child, family members, and in a state care home she was abused. She carried around the book, The Imitation of Christ. She spent she spent a lot of time on the street with some of these street kids as a young lady, and she knew them all. Mm-hmm. And she knew which ones were seeing Bishop Ryan. And I met with her, and she gave me I gave an interview, an hour-long interview, recorded it, transcribed it, and she gave me a lot of names of individuals that had been to see the bishop, if you will. I found them. I found most of them. About 4 of them were in different Illinois prisons for petty theft, bad checks, that sort of thing. And I went to interview them.
Right.
And that's where it all started to come together. But what was so surprising is when I went to the Catholic hierarchy, Cardinal George in particular, first Bernardine when he was alive, then Cardinal George, nothing. In fact, they wanted me to shut my mouth. They wouldn't do anything. And that's when I sort of went public and people started contacting me. The Wanderer started to give me some good coverage up front. And then I started getting information from all around the world, and we started working on a bunch of cases, and it just exploded from there.
Sure. Great place to stop. This is where people have not looked into this issue. You need to pay attention. I would say the time frame on this, was this around the 90s or 80s?
96, 96, 97, 98.
Yeah, when things first started, when the veneer first started cracking, I thought it was like really just gross moral cowardice, but it was far deeper than that. And I was hoping you could go into a little bit. Then you found out firsthand this was systemic. And one thing that struck me, and I've noticed it took me a long time to really pick up on this, particularly the bishops. When you listen to these guys speak, it sounds like there's some sort of institutional corporate culture rather than the supernatural path to salvation or the Catholic Church. You follow what I'm saying? Could you speak to that a little bit? Your experience with the?
Oh yeah, it was CYA, as they used to say in the military. Right. Cover your backside, and they would basically just trying to appease the press. They were just trying to calm things down. But you know what was so sad? They kept referring to all these priests that were giving me information, all these street kids, as not credible. Not credible. The irony is, it's the hierarchy right now that's not credible. And in fact, I was working with Father Hardin, Father Malachi Martin, Father Charles Fiore, Father Minkler, Father Kuntz. It was Father Hardin that put me in touch with most of them, and may he rest in peace. He's the one that gave me a lot of guidance. Wow. And he asked me to work with him, and I did. And I was in contact with Cardinal George going back and forth. And what was so sad and disturbing, Cardinal George, I had his private cell phone number, talked to him on occasion, had a meeting coming up at his chancery.
Mhm.
And he found out I was about to hold a press conference, and he called me and told me that if I went ahead with this press conference, we'd be stuck with Ryan. He said, the Vatican won't deal through the press. I said, you mean, Your Eminence, rather than face embarrassment, you will let this predatory homosexual stay in power and destroy souls?
There you
And
go.
he wouldn't answer me. At that point, I hung up. But before I hung up, he offered me a relationship with the hierarchy if I'd be obedient. And I asked what that meant. I guess I would get a wine and dine and schmooze with the bishops and be one of their, politically correct friends. And but he said I had to be obedient, and I asked what that meant. It meant keeping my mouth shut when I was told to. So I hung up on him. I canceled the upcoming meeting I had, and I said, "We're not going to be quiet. We're not going to sit for this." And what's another irony to this whole thing is Father Hardin came to see me. I picked him up at the St. Louis airport.
Mhm.
He met with our board members, and he instructed me that obedience with Father Hardin, he said, it's not a vow with me, it's a way of life. He said, Stephen, I've been ordered by the Vatican to do everything I can to convince you to be quiet. So on the way back from the airport in St. Louis, nobody said the rosary faster than Father Hardin. We were saying that 30-minute drive. My wife would always caution me for being too fast, and Father Hardin was quick. Anyway, when we got up to the residence where we met with two priests, board members, Father Hardin again told everybody, he said, I'm here to convince you to be quiet. He said, I'm on orders of the Vatican. He pulled me aside. He said, Stephen, I'm under orders of the Vatican. I'm obedient. But he said, privately, he said, don't you ever quit what you're doing. And he told my attorney the same thing. And he's the one that introduced me to Father Alfred Kuntz, who was later, that murder's never been solved. And Father Hardin thought it was church connected.
Was that the guy who got a bullet in his head?
No, Father Alfred Kuntz in Dane, Wisconsin. His throat was cut. His body was mutilated. He was a canon lawyer. It was 1998, March 5th, 1998. I got the phone call, and I spent 4 hours being interrogated by the detectives. I had to prove where I was, which is obvious. You've got to clear everybody,
Sure,
close
sure.
first. They want to know what files I had of Father Hardin's, but I think the key here is the fact that around 2000, I was called to Washington, D.C. Mr. Bennett, who was the attorney representing the bishops in that investigation, that John Jay study, that investigation. And
Right.
my attorney and I presented Mr. Bennett in his office with 550 pages of documents on the Ryan investigation. And they thanked us. We sort of gave a deposition, if you will, of sorts. And then we left them with the information. And to this day, nothing was ever done by the Conference of Bishops. They never contacted me. Later on, Bishop Lucas in Springfield hired Mr. Bill Roberts, a former federal prosecutor, to investigate the diocese and the claims I was making. But it only happened after I became so vocal. It was so hard for them to just ignore everything I was doing. I think the key that finally got them to remove Ryan, even when they came out with a report to their investigation, they didn't mention homosexuality once in the report that Bill Roberts put together. I'm sure he was following the rules of the diocese at the time. But I think the key that got rid of Bishop Ryan when they moved him out of the area, because Lucas had taken over him, Ryan had retired. Ryan had a domestic disturbance at his home he was living in. The diocese purchased for him. And a young man came to see him because he stole this kid's boyfriend. And he caught him together. There was a little bit of an altercation. Actually, the Solgen Center was called to the house. I got the police report. I interviewed the neighbor who said the young man, Timothy Hugo, I interviewed him. He doesn't mind his name being made public. It's been in some of my newsletters. You know what's so sad is this young man was a Catholic and is an active homosexual. And he introduced me to the so-called love of his life one day at a restaurant when I took him out to dinner to talk to him more. And in the same conversation, the same sentence, they could speak about homosexual activity and their Catholic faith. See, they had no idea. But see, Bishop Ryan he had told me, Timothy had told me that Bishop Bryan told him he didn't think homosexuality was a sin. And
And he's a bishop.
he's a bishop. So when you see that multiplied, at the time I had still had no idea how corrupt the total hierarchy was. But it's just you expand that over the whole country, the whole world, and you realize, but they protected Bishop Bryan. And but who did he know? What did he know? What did he have on everybody else? He came from the Joliet diocese. Bishop Amish, I got reports on his activities as well. And they came from Cardinal Bernardine. And I was investigating Bernardine, got a lot of information there. So it was sort of a trickle down effect, if you will. I hate to use that term.
Yeah, no, I know.
I mean, it just, they brought in their own kind, it appeared to me. And they covered for each other.
Sure,
And
sure.
that's what I began to learn. But
Stevie, it almost seems to me that in a way, everybody has dirt on everybody else, and they like it that way because it sort of acts as a check and balance. But what's most stressing to me, and this is what I want to get to, is sort of the next area, is, and you'd mentioned actually Malachi Martin. I didn't know that that you knew him. But I don't think you can have this discussion without looking at the diabolical. It's obvious to anyone that looks at this this issue of the church is under gargantuan assault. I mean, the church has always been the firewall to Western civilization. I think you were alluding to that a little earlier. You know, for evil to be successful, no other organization stood, you know, as formidable as the Catholic Church. So to me, it made sense. It had to go. Can you talk a little bit, just you know, maybe some brief background historically, you know, Belladad, the seminaries, that kind of thing. But and I didn't know you knew Malachi Martin. Can you address that issue a little bit?
absolutely. Malachi Martin, well, first of all, Belladad, as we know, came to Congress, I think in 1950, 52, and testified
Yes.
to the fact she was a communist lawyer. She testified to the fact that communist plants were put into the seminaries because the Catholic Church was the biggest threat to the communist countries.
Absolutely.
It once was. It's not anymore. I mean, in
Well,
my
they're
opinion,
they're
because
on
of
board
the,
now.
and so if you, a lot of people took what she said, you know, lightly and didn't really think a lot of it. I didn't realize she was around until much later, obviously. But when you go back and you look at what she said, what she testified to, it all fits now with the corruption of the Catholic hierarchy because it's unbelievable what goes on, and the fact that no bishop worldwide has stood up, and by that I mean no bishop, even the so-called good ones. You've not had one that's come forward and tell us how they work underneath, how they move the money around,
Right.
what the pattern of protection. And so I don't care who they claim as the good guy. They're not a good guy unless they come clean and tell us the inner workings. Malachi Martin contacted me early on once I started to get a lot of press.
When was this?
This was 1997.
Okay.
And when Father Hardin was still alive. And Malachi Martin said he wrote a piece for me that appeared in one of the newsletters on Cardinal Mahoney. And he was wonderful to talk to. I never met him in person. Everything was by phone and by letter and by email. But to talk to the guy, he could just so incite me. I mean, get me going. He knew everything. And
Right.
when he contacted me, first was a letter. He wanted to be kept informed, wanted to work with me. I had heard good and bad about Malachi Martin. So I went to Father Hardin. I said, Father Hardin, Malachi Martin, Father Martin has contacted me, wants to work with me. Should I do that? I said, I've heard good and bad about him, Father Martin or Father Hardin. I said, what should I do? And all Father Hardin would say, he was a man of few words. He said, Malachi Martin is right with the church. That's all he would say. So I said that. So I don't know if he meant what he said was right, or we're all sinners and he's okay, or he
Right.
knows the faith. But I just took that to mean that I could work with him, and I did,
Sure.
and whatnot. And that goes back to the satanic. He had a strong belief, and I believe it now because I've had some testimony to the fact. He talked about the situation with Agnes and the abuse of Bernadine there in, I think it was South Carolina.
Right.
I've actually met the woman and got some testimony. And anyway,
For our audience, so you're referring to Bernadine's satanic issues?
yes,
Yeah.
with the ritualistic abuse of this child in 1957. I think Malachi Martin fudged a few details, but but the young lady doesn't want me to go into that too much. So
Okay,
I
of course.
but anyway, it's sort of, but how can it not be diabolical when the hierarchy, for example, they a gay ministry, they're promoting homosexual activity by not condemning. You know, it's a sin that cries to heaven for vengeance. But I had a bishop tell me at a meeting. I met with a bishop a couple of months back. Was very discouraged. I thought he was a good guy, and I asked him about a homosexual priest, active homosexual priest that was removed, but this bishop had known, and the prior bishop had known 20 years earlier that the guy was a predatory homosexual because I gave them firsthand testimony from one of his customers. And what the bishop told me, the bishop's still in power, he said, well, we wanted to save the vocation. I said, what kind of vocation are you saving? What kind of, this began to tell me that this bishop himself had a problem, and I caught him in another lie.
Right,
And
right, exactly.
you go through this. And then when I came across St. Sebastian's Angels, this gets to the diabolical end of it, and a network of homosexual clergy operating on the internet. Actually, one of their members contacted me because it was a sealed group. And actually, they accused me of hacking the site and said they were going to turn me over to the FBI. They didn't know I was working with the FBI at the time. And I had all these pictures. I had hundreds of emails. Nothing educates you more to the thinking of a homosexual priest than all their emails communicating with one another. And I didn't hack the site. And this if you search St. Sebastian's Angels, there's Mr. Hitchcock even wrote a story on it. There's stories all over the world, all over the internet about it. But what was so disturbing is all these clergy, many we identified from these parts of the country, one bishop in South Africa, they, in their communications back and forth, they convinced themselves they were celibate because they didn't have sex with men.
Oh,
And
of course.
I'm going to spare you some of the language they used, but they believed they were celibate because they only had sex with other men. And they convinced themselves of this. In fact, one of the priests asked for prayers from the whole group. It was a priest in Georgia who his lover had left and had to go back to his wife. And he asked for prayers because he lost the love of his life. And I'm thinking, nobody prayed for the wife. Nobody told him to straighten his act up. But when I had all this information together before we went public, I went to every cardinal in this country. I wrote him a letter. And finally, I spoke to Cardinal George. I said, Your Eminence, nobody wants this information. I've got nude pictures they've been sharing. I've got hundreds of emails, if not thousands. And I said, these people are actually serving as pastors, as bishops in parishes. They're
Sure.
destroying souls. Will you take this information and do something? And Cardinal George's words to me were, well, Stephen, I don't want to see it. It may be a near occasion of sin.
What?
But how do you hear confession? How do you go to a YMCA? How do you go to a locker room? There's no women involved in this. There's no nude pictures of women. And I thought it's another cop out. It's another escape, another defense. So
Wow.
not one prelate in this country. I even contacted a few bishops. But see, the thing is, during the exchange of the emails of these homosexual clergy, there was some like 55 in the group at the time I intercepted them.
Okay.
They were talking about a few American bishops' homosexual activities. I have information that I've never made public, and information that you don't want. Father Hardin always said I need to be prudent. He said I wasn't prudent enough. So you wanna hold back a few things. I wanna make sure everything's right before I expose it.
Sure.
But when no cardinal would help me, no bishop would help me, that's when I went public with St. Sebastian's Angels. So it's convinced me. See, these bishops, they don't know the diabolical comes in, they don't know what love is.
Yes.
Because for in fact, they don't love their fellow priest enough or bishop enough to correct them.
That's a
Look at
great point.
look at Cardinal McCarrick. Nobody loved that until James Grimes came out, that victim. The poor man's went public, a hero. He saved us because
Yeah.
had James not come forward, I've had the blessings to meet him a few times. Had he not come forward, Cardinal McCarrick would probably still be floating around the hierarchy
Absolutely.
and not bishop. They claim they had an investigation,
Okay.
but they didn't tell you which bishops covered up for them. They're still protecting one another. So this goes back again as the diabolical, and I keep going back to that because
Right,
it's
right.
not the devil. What is it? because it's power, sex, money, and drugs. But you have to understand, we've got to take another approach because they control the money, billions of dollars. We don't know where it goes. They
The money
control.
laundering operation. They don't have to. They don't have to have accountability.
Yeah, and that's the problem. That's when I started investigating some hidden corporations I found. Well, they weren't hidden. You just had to know where to look. They're legally formed corporations by some of the bishops, but it's a really sad situation and the
Yeah.
way it's suffering.
Amazing, actually. In the course of your work, one of the things I picked up, and I've followed this for a while, but to me, in a way, the systemic rot, particularly within the hierarchy, is so strong, and the ridiculous Saul Alinsky tactics that they employ in many respects, and the behind the scenes sort of tactics. In a way, it almost increases my faith, because if you study any church history, this has really taken on a full-time gallop since, call it, the 50s.
Yeah.
You know,
Well, Paul Marx once told me, Father Paul Marx, when he was alive, I visited him several times, and I remember the first time he took me out to dinner, he ordered a beer, and he looked at me because I looked at him. He said, "Yeah, priests drink beer, Stephen. Priests drink beer." But Father Paul Marx, he made it clear to me. He said, "Don't stop what you're doing. You've got to keep what you're doing." And he said he pointed out the corruption within the hierarchy himself, and I think he suffered a little bit from it. But
sure, because they torture those guys. I heard you once say this. I believe the priest's name in Chicago was Kowalczyk, who burned a gay banner.
Father
Right?
Kalnick, yes.
Oh, probably Kalchak, right? They treated him horribly, and then had they treat the guys in Miami.
Well, the priest that or errant priest, I asked a bishop about this one time because priests that had been active homosexuals and stealing thousands of dollars. I worked with the IRS on 2 cases where over $1 million was taken by 2 priests, one in the Joliet diocese, one in Peoria, one in Arlington. And the bishop pays their debt, and nobody can accuse them of stealing unless the bishop does. But it goes back to the corruption. I forget what was. I forget. I lost my train of thought there for a second.
Oh,
But what were you at? What did you ask me specifically? I'm sorry.
Oh no, we were just chatting. Actually, we can move on. But
Yeah.
I did have another question. Was it? Oh, I started originally saying that in a way it increases my faith, because they're so counter sacramental. They're so counter one holy Catholic Apostolic Church. They're the complete opposite. They're involved in almost organized racketeering in many respects.
That goes back to what
Yeah.
Father Mark said. That you brought me back to my point. Father Mark said it's a great time to be alive, Stephen, because there's plenty to fight for. And when he was encouraging me, he said he quoted someone. He said, when everybody's running to jump off the cliff, the guy that's running in the opposite direction, he was talking about me because I was going against the system, looks like a damn fool. And how true it is. And it is a great time to be alive, because once I got into this, you had to look at your own faith.
Yes.
And you had to start examining your own life. I know the very first Wanderer article I did, I referred to myself as one time the world's biggest heathen. And everybody asked me, including my wife, why would you say that? I said, well, I've been in the army. I hadn't gone to mass. And I said, what else are they going to say about me now? How else can they pick on me when I refer to myself as one time the biggest heathen? Yeah. And it was just a defense mechanism, but it does make your faith a lot stronger, because you realize when you look at the faith, the natural law, how accurate and how truthful and how positive and how real the Catholic faith is. I often think about, who thought the day would come? The devil has been so active in the bishops when a woman would demand the right to kill her own baby.
Yes.
I've assisted in the birth of 7 children. I can't imagine. I might defend that child with my life if I had to, but I sure wouldn't think about killing that child. And how a woman could do that, that shows you how far we've fallen. And it's all because of the bishops. The bishops, look at the pro-board politicians, especially the Catholics, but look at the big shots like Cuomo and Pelosi. They're wined and dined by the bishops.
How does Dolan sit down at a dinner and yuck it up with Mario Cuomo? You can't.
Absolutely. That's like a Jewish congregation sitting down with Hitler.
That's right.
That's equivalent. People don't like me using that comparison, but abortion has killed more in this country than Hitler ever did. What Hitler did was horrendous. It was awful,
Yeah, no,
unforgivable.
I know you're.
But look at what we've done here, and the bishops look at Biden receiving communion every Sunday and
Yeah.
flaunting the Catholic faith. Can these bishops? They can't believe in offense to God. They can't believe in the real presence. They can't believe in sin. They can't believe in hell. So they've proven that by their actions and their inactions, and that's where we're at. That's why I think people just need to look at that from a basic, simple standpoint.
Yes.
Like I said, love me as I have loved them, as I have loved you. And you can see, as the Benedictine once said, it's not an act of charity to allow one's neighbor to run headlong into hell. And
Right.
People need to look at that and think about what's going on and fight it the simplest way. Stop giving them money. And
Yes.
at present, I've been in contact with federal, state, and local law enforcement agencies trying to get something going. But you got to understand the Catholic hierarchy, in my opinion, is in bed with the Democratic Party right now. They
Absolutely.
receive
No question.
billions of dollars from the government, and they're not going to rock that boat.
$3 billion from the PPP program alone. You think they had some incentive in shutting down the churches?
You folks have covered a lot of that.
What did? Sorry?
You folks have covered a lot of that. The
Yes.
corruption, where the money's going. So
Yeah, and it's interesting, and I want to get on this this path for a second because I'm reminded of Cardinal Supich and when this whole thing was going down, and he literally had the audacity to say, "We're not going to get down this rabbit hole." The quote. But Michael Hitchborn, before and you alluded to this earlier, when he uncovers something, he takes the route of fraternal correction. Okay, so what he will do is he will literally take that information and go to the offending bishop, right? And he'll say like, "Okay, what say you?" And he'll send it to him. And then when he doesn't get any, and he'll say, give a certain amount of time. And when he does, and when there's no response or the guy doesn't do anything, he'll go to several other bishops before he goes public. In other words, he goes through every channel possible to try to correct this behind the scenes. And this brings up an interesting point. And I'm going to tie this into what we're just talking about. And you look at, the example I used was Cardinal Dolan sitting down with Mario Cuomo. When you go back in history, right? And I was speaking to Hitchborn, I was talking to him about this. This started with the Kennedys, right? How do you separate your Catholicism from your politics? Well, the answer is you can't. It's poor. You cannot separate any part of your life from your Catholicism. Any part. I'm sorry to lay that on anyone, but you can't possibly, and I believe it was the Kennedys who came up with, although I'm personally opposed with abortion, it's absolute nonsense, right? Because you're now complicit in an absolute diabolical evil now, and you can't use the excuse that although I'm personally opposed, I'm doing the will of the people. No, you have to carry it everywhere with you, whether that is in the workplace and certainly in the political arena. And so this is my point. So when you get to, we're looking at it right now, and you mentioned a few names. You have Nancy Pelosi, Andrew Cuomo, right? I'm sorry, he's just so offensive to even listen to. The nursing home deaths, this guy's incredible. And they sit down and they'll serve Cardinal Gregory in Washington D.C. said you have no problem serving Joe Biden communion, right? And I guess my question to you is, there's such a disconnect between the hierarchy, right, and the deposit of faith. What do we do from here? I mean,
that proves they've lost their faith if they ever had it. And the catch-22 is they bring in their own kind. They control completely who comes into the hierarchy, and that's where. So we've got to expose them. And what I believe, and then like we just talked about, they tell me canon law has to be followed when they get a homosexual priest. They can't just throw them out. Canon law's got to be followed. But they never do that with an Orthodox priest. They just cut the ties and throw them out and leave them abandoned. But the faithful right now, what we have to do, I think we've got to reach out publicly to our Protestant friends. By that, I mean, I've suggested before to a group, I truly believe, and some of my ideas are a little off the wall, but I believe we need, as groups, Catholic groups, we need to get together and hold a conference in Washington, D.C., and publicly apologize to the country, to the Protestants, the Jews, to everybody, for the damage that's done to this civilization by the Catholic hierarchy. We need to call them out publicly, and
Wow.
then let them defend themselves and bring in the right speakers to cover different topics. Look at feminism. Look at the destruction the Catholic hierarchy has done. Even the Vatican II documents state that if the woman's in the choir shouldn't be in the sanctuary. I mean, so women shouldn't be in the sanctuary. That's not degrading to women.
No, it's not. They're different roles. And you've said publicly many times, and I agree with you that actually for men and women to be equal, women would have to lower themselves.
Right. Well, the greatest gift ever given to anybody by God was given to a woman,
Absolutely.
marriage. So I mean, that's the importance of the family, the importance of the woman in the family.
Yes.
And I think we've got to remember that. And so I think we've got to be very public. We've got to, I've got enough information, I believe, that the Fed should have taken action against this hierarchy and a RICO lawsuit long time ago.
How is that possible, by the way? You're telling me, that's a great question. You're telling me that you have enough information. I'm watching this from the outside looking in going, this is absolutely under RICO statutes. How is this not happening?
Well, I don't know if in Chicago, I know I've dealt with a few law enforcement in the Chicago area, and they seem reluctant to take on the Catholic Church. But then again, who's your president? You
Yes.
think he's going to stand for his Congress picking on the bishops that are giving him communion and giving him a pass on everything? So I think there's one hand washed the others in the corruption, I do believe, between the Catholic hierarchy and the political hierarchy. And I think they're reluctant to take action. I was providing information to the FBI back when Clinton was president, and I had information on some clergy that no bishop wanted. It was a priest traveling with a young boy he referred to as not his current lover. I had an email, I had a picture, I had his statements. Nobody wanted it but the FBI. The FBI came to me twice for information on various subjects. I was feeding them information. The agent called me up. He said, "Mr. Brady, don't send anything that's just homosexual related. It's got to be involving children abuse," because he said, "Mr. Brady, we're getting a lot of trouble here. It's not politically correct to disparage the homosexual in any way." So that told me back then, when Clinton was in power, the way the homosexual movement had moved into the government. Now, a lot of folks say, "Well, you hate homosexuals." Nothing can be further from the truth. I love them enough to tell them the truth. I've had homosexual priests come to me, and I've helped them because their bishop was demanding sexual favors. That's happened on several occasions. And I helped the clergy involved to some degree, the way I could help them. And it's really sad because the bishops are denying them the truth. They're actually showing their hatred for the homosexual by not being honest with them. And so I think we have to go very public, because my wife lost 20% of her business at the pizza place when I started this. It's her pizza place, family pizza place. And anyway, the Protestants made up for it. When they saw how vocal I was asked to join several Protestant congregations. They thought I was more Protestant than Catholic, but what they didn't realize, they were more Catholic than most of them. Because they still believed in the sanctity of marriage.
Yes.
They still believed homosexual was wrong, activity was wrong. They still believed family was being protected, abortion was wrong. So I think we need to be very public and in the face of the bishops, because if you got to force the bishops to respond now. If you hold a conference, a big convention in Washington, D.C., and you make very public statements in a full-page ad in the Washington Times, if I can raise the money, I'll set this up. But in there, raise it. The headline will read, "Catholic groups apologize for the corruption in the Catholic hierarchy that has helped destroy this culture." And at the conference, bring a series of lectures in, like Elizabeth Yore and Michael himself, and bring the different groups in to point out, cover different subjects, and point out how the bishops have helped corrupt society, and we need to apologize. We need to force the bishops to come out and explain themselves. The key is they can't do it. They can't do it because what are they going to argue? Because like you've pointed out and I've pointed out, they don't love their fellow man.
No.
They've proven that. They don't believe in the Catholic faith. They don't believe in the real presence, because they wouldn't give it to Joe Biden if they did. So I think we need to call them out. We need to force them out. And the faithful need to stop giving money, because it's beyond the point of, we all know they're having sex everywhere. They're cheating, they're lying, they're stealing, they're not following the faith. But now we have to make it a personal, very public issue. I do believe. I could be wrong, but I think that's the approach we need to take.
That's the only way we're going to get their attention, Stephen. Because you take away their power source, which is the money flow. I mean, let's face it. Since there has been no reconciliation or accounting of the accounts, we don't know where that money went.
Well, there's still some good. There's still some good people.
Oh yeah,
in the federal prosecutors' offices,
oh,
in the FBI, in the Department of Justice, and I think, and we also know there's some corrupt ones there. We found that out during the Trump administration and everything that was pulled. But I think we've got to reach out to these people, prick their conscience.
yes.
You know, start letting the world hear a little bit about the Catholic faith. You know, when I started to do this publicly, I would get contacts from all over the world. And not too long ago, I got a contact from Ireland, and they wanted to use my name and wanted my advice. And I asked them, why me? They said, Mr. Brady, because we know you care, and we know you'll do something, even if it isn't successful. We've got to give these young people something to hold on to. Wow. Instead of, when they see homosexuals being given communion, pro-abortions being given communion, why can't they justify shacking up? Why can't they justify not going to mass?
Why would you? I mean,
we've got to give them something to hold on to and something to fight for. So that's where we need to go, I do believe.
I'll tell you, and I think we're going to end it there, but I would like to say something, a couple of observations, Stephen. Number one is, I know you don't need to hear it, but great work, honestly. Number two is you're an excellent example of what model to follow. We were talking before the show, and I said to you, you and I, we don't have advanced degrees in theology or law, but you speak with a real authentic authority, and you're a real gift to the church. Keep fighting, Stephen. Really, you got to fight. And so we're going to leave it there. And this is Jim Mullen saying goodbye from General Quarters at the Lepanto Institute. We were really blessed today to have founder of Roman Catholic Faithful, Stephen Brady, talk to us, and it was a great show, Stephen. We're going to say goodbye, and we'll see you guys next time.
Thank you very much.
You bet, Steve. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.